so much, and thank you so much for inviting me to host this webinar. I'm so excited about sharing with you some of my research and insights around the neuroscience of talent. So you've actually heard a little bit about LeadershipHQ, so thank you for that. So LeadershipHQ actually started as a blog because I loved writing and speaking about leadership, and discovered the world of neuroscience a few years ago, and it's just made such a difference to not only myself in terms of as a leader in every aspect of my life, but also with the leaders and organisations that I work with. It's become quite a cutting edge and pretty exciting aspect of what's happening in terms of leadership around the globe, because there's so much more we're learning about how our brain works and operates. So my intention today is to really share with you some of the research and insights around why understanding neuroscience is so vital in terms of our roles as leaders, and also in the talent management space, and how we go about leading and managing talent today around the globe. So today I'm really going to give you a bit of a snapshot around areas such as, neuroplasticity, the social brain, threat and reward, and also I'm going to talk to you about a really interesting model called the SCARF model. Now, at the end I'm going to share with you my details, because if you do miss anything, because I'm going to be sharing a lot of information in this webinar, please feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to share some articles around this space. So if you do find that you can't keep up with the information today, there are some really interesting articles and information I can share to you after the webinar. So neuroscience. We know more about what's going on with the brain in the last 20 years than we have in the whole history of mankind. And that's due to the fact of something called MRIs. Neuroscience is providing, powerful insights, into cognitive and behavioural processes, how the mind and the body, interrelate, and also it's changing the way we think about thinking. So it's a pretty exciting time in terms of understanding what I think is our most important tool, the brain. And neuroscience ultimately is just really about the study of brain functioning, from its basic unit, being a single neuron, to actually complex neural networks and maps that represent every concept, thought, and action that we experience. And so, and we continue to find out so much more through the ongoing research around the globe around how this amazing organ works for us. The interesting thing about the brain is that it only weighs 1.5 kilos, but it actually takes up about 20% of our body's energy. So that's why it's vital that we understand how our brain operates and works, and that we take really good care of our brain, because that's why sometimes you find at the end of, say, a training workshop, or you're doing a lot of, lots of thinking and processing, at the end of the day you get quite exhausted. It's because your brain is taking up so much of your daily energy, and being only 1.5 kilos, it's important that we do take care of our brain and understand how to actually manage our brain as well. So when we think about talent management, again, the war for talent is still happening around the globe. It's important that we're recruiting effectively when it comes to our talent, that we're actually developing our talent, and we're also creating cultures that are collaborative and engaging, because we want to retain and engage our talent. So today, in terms of organisations to become truly successful, talent management is vital. And neuroscience is new to talent management, not only because it hasn't actually been relevant, but only now this science is actually being interpreted for organisational contexts. And also, with the brain being the centre of everything we do, it actually it really offers a way to understand how people approach work and actually respond to everyday workplace situations. So when we think about challenges in terms of when it comes to talent, and if you take a few minutes just to really, even with your role currently within your organisations, if you think about your challenges that you find as a leader within your organisation, there are many different challenges, in terms of keeping people focused at work, providing feedback, and recruiting the best talent, and making sure that we're developing them. All these things really require us in terms of our thinking and how we actually can fold neuroscience into overcoming some of these challenges. So today I'm going to give you some insights in terms of different parts of the brain. I'm going to talk about an area called neuroplasticity, about the social brain in terms of our brains are actually a social organ. Our brains are also pretty much motivated by threat and reward. I'm going to talk about the SCARF model and how really talent is grown and how coaching can make a huge difference as well in terms of helping with all these different areas. So when we think about understanding talent, and as I mentioned before, organisations really are about people. For organisations to be truly successful, it needs its people. And it needs people to be engaged and feeling that they're rewarded at work, and that there's trust and there's collaboration, and we've got engaging workplaces. And for people to feel engaged and happy within an organisation, it's about tapping into understanding the different parts of the brain to help with that development and engagement and reward. Because really, for people to actually work at the best that they can, they need to be able to understand their brains. So there's two areas I'm really going to be focusing on today, and that is the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. Now, the prefrontal cortex is it's the highest evolved part of the brain. It's actually called the executive function. It's where we actually use that part of the brain for analytical problem solving, short-term working memory. It can actually be easily overwhelmed and actually has limited capacity. So it's actually pretty much energy absorbing. The human prefrontal cortex actually differentiates us from other mammals because of complex cognition, abstract thinking, planning. But using our prefrontal cortex, and as I mentioned before, can have a significant drain on our body. So it's really important that we take care of our prefrontal cortex, because some researchers estimate that pretty much 2 to 3 hours per day of activity could actually deplete the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex actually moderates our limbic instincts and allows us to respond mindfully to emotionally charged situations. The next part of the brain, which is incredibly important as well, is called the limbic system. It's actually the most ancient part of the brain. It has different areas of the brain. The limbic system comprises of things like the amygdala, which is your fight or flight emotional center of your brain, the hippocampus, which is where we store our memory, and also the basal ganglia, which is where we actually have those automated actions. Now, the limbic system is where we do a lot of our subconscious functioning. It's where we hold our survival instincts. It's very powerful. It has immense capacity and also that long-term memory storage. Now, because the limbic system operates subconsciously, because of mostly habits, which we could call, pre-recorded hardwired programs that allow us to complete thousands of activities each day. So if you really think about when you get up in the morning and you get out of bed, you have your routine, you have your habits. That's the limbic system coming into play. And this is why, a lot of us find change initiatives quite difficult. If you try to change habits or you're trying to implement a change within an organisation, the brain resists change because the brain, takes 20% of our energy. Anything new that we need to learn or any sort of change that takes place, the brain automatically goes, don't know about this, I'm already using so much energy. For me to actually change a habit or change a way of thinking or behaviour is going to take a bit of work. So that's why as leaders it's really important that we actually tap into the limbic system or the emotional part of the brain if we do want to change any sort of thinking or implement any sort of change management process. So when we are actually tired or stressed, the limbic system will actually take control and the prefrontal functions will shut down. And I like to use an example, for instance, I don't know if any of you have ever seen it or experienced it, where you might be sitting down at work and your manager comes up to you and says, right, your work wasn't good enough and I want to talk to you about it later in front of everybody, and you sit there and you can't think, you're in such shock. You're sitting there going, I can't believe you just said that to me in front of everyone. That's because your limbic system's taken over your prefrontal cortex because you're in high stress alert. And then when your limbic system calms down, maybe an hour later, you think to yourself, gee, I wish I'd actually responded this way, or I wish I'd made the decision to react this way, because your limbic system's calmed down. So it's interesting that the different aspects of the brain and how they all work together. So next I'm going to talk about plasticity, neuroplasticity. So for a long time, research showed us that we always made this assumption that, you've got to, as kids, your brains are like sponges, and then you go through adolescence and you continue to learn, and then there's a certain part in your adulthood that you stop learning. You've already learned as much as you can. Well, neuroscience has actually shown us that the brain is constantly changing, and it's called neuroplasticity. It's like Play-Doh, plasticine, plastic. It's constantly reshaping and creating new wiring and new thinking, which is really, really exciting. And, it's that whole thing around you can't teach a dog new tricks. You can teach a dog new tricks. It's just that you have to be open to learning. So when you think about a workplace context, neuroplasticity can have profound implications on learning adaptability. The brain is actually, in fact, predisposed to change and growth. I mean, the challenge is whether people can change or grow, whether the conditions in which they do so are actually conducive to training or changing, or whether they're actually discouraging. So it's called Hebb's law, and it's about neurons. So neurons that wire together, neurons that fire together wire together. So when we're actually, learning things and we're actually able to link those to emotions, we're actually creating new wiring. So I'm hoping today that you're having lots of neurons firing in your brain because you're learning all this great stuff, and you'll walk away from today's webinar and you'll be thinking, okay, I actually learned some really interesting things about neuroscience today, and your brain has changed. You've created new neurons wiring together. You've essentially created neuroplasticity in your brain because you've learned something new from actually this webinar. So when I think about, the whole aspect of neuroplasticity and talent management, we can actually change. The brain can form new cells. It can form new connections. And we're seeing things around culture in terms of, there's a real concept now around learning organisations, and I see it every day in the work I do, that organisations are now trying to create workplace environments that facilitate and encourage and reward learning. Leadership, again, I'm seeing that by looking at this neuroscience and neuroplasticity, this research and fundamental things that we're learning about, how we can actually change our brains, now leaders are encouraging and supporting learning in their teams, and they're actually, providing stretch and challenge to create new brain circuitry. And finally, engagement. Personal growth and learning are, pretty much among the most engaging elements of work and key motivators for many employees. So I'm actually seeing now lots of learning and development initiatives and approaches that are really now focused through a neuroscience lens, and also people really understanding how not only to, lead change, but what change means to them and also the people that they're working with. So now we're seeing more diverse and stimulating, holistic leadership programs and also change led from the inside out. Next is the social brain. Now this is really interesting because neuroscience has shown us that the brain is a social organ. So I'm actually going to talk to you about a couple of scenarios which are really interesting. So imagine that you're walking down the street and you trip and you fall on your elbow and you actually hurt yourself. First there's shock, and then there's pain receptors, and then it starts sending, these messages to your brain, and your skin starts to hurt, and you're bruised, and your heart is racing, and this is about you feeling pretty much physical pain. Then the other scenario, you arrive at a work function, you're keen to start to network, speak to the CEO, you wander up to the CEO, he's in a friendly conversation with one of his colleagues, their conversation stops when you start to approach, and you sense some discomfort, and within moments the CEO excuses himself and moves off to another group without even looking at you. This is called social pain, that whole, oh, what happened there, and how come you didn't talk to me, and so, yeah, that is called social pain. But what's been really interesting about social pain, and this is what research is showing us, is that when they did MRIs on each of those two scenarios, one being you falling over versus, turning up to a networking function and feeling, rejected by the CEO, is that the same regions of the brain are activated in MRIs. Pain is pain. So if you think about a work situation, when we threaten a colleague's social standing or self-perception, we're actually inflicting pain. So the brain feels the same pain as physical pain, which is really interesting when you think about it. And the other thing that's quite interesting is neuroscientists have also discovered something called mirror neurons. Now, mirror neurons are actions of someone else by reenacting them as if you were doing them, so like you're looking in the mirror. So for instance, someone walks into your office, they've just had a altercation on the way to work, they're frustrated, they're upset. Now, mirror neurons, we pick them up. Automatically, our brains subconsciously pick up those mirror neurons and we take them on board, and then we start to feel, oh, I feel a bit frustrated and upset as well. That's why it's really important that we look at our emotions when we turn up to work, because emotions, it's been proven, can be contagious. So in terms of talent management, our social brain explains a lot about how we interact and the fundamental importance of these interactions for our ability to actually generate and process throughout, and also interpreting those non-verbal signals and emphasizing with others as well. Now I love this slide picture because I think it's really cute with the brain on the pin, but it really does kind of talk to us around that whole threat and reward, because the brain is actually motivated by either threat and reward, and that's through evolution. So, if we think about where we came from the cavemen days, and if you think about the cavemen, back then, their brains were very much on high alert for threat. There probably wasn't a lot of reward happening back there because cavemen were always looking at the external environment for predators. And through evolution, our brain actually hasn't changed that much. we still are very motivated by threat and reward, and that's really important for our survival because, you know, our brains need to be on high alert for threat because we're constantly wanting to focus on survival. But the brain is also seeking reward. So in the absence of any threat and danger, we actually search for ways to increase reward. And any rewards to the brain can mean anything that improves our situation, whether physical or mental. It could be food or water, it could be some chocolate, it could be a long run, it could be someone actually saying something, you know, really lovely to you or giving you some positive feedback. And when we actually feel reward, we get this amazing chemical in our brain called dopamine. And that's a way of the brain, that's a really positive chemical because it's the way your brain is saying, oh, that's good, I'll actually have some more of that. So both threat and reward are primary motivators. We avoid threats and we approach reward. And this is fundamental in terms of understanding, you know, what is actually driving behaviour in the workplace. And also, importantly, science behind this, you know, really shows us that we can use these findings to understand how to be better managers and better leaders and also better human beings. So when we think about threat and reward in terms of, you know, culture and leadership and engagement, you know, it's really important that we look at, you know, when we describe organisations' culture, what words are we actually using? You know, is it fun, supportive, or is there actually, you know, aspects of our culture that could be threatening? If we think about leadership, I mean, leaders are in a critical position that can manage threat and reward balance in their teams and across the organisation. And also engagement. You know, the neuroscience of engagement clearly points to heightened reward states. In this state, employees are more open-minded and creative, whereas the threat state predisposes employees to more of that limbic-driven thinking, which can be actually quite reactive and protective. So I'm actually seeing and experiencing in the work that I do that I'm seeing organisations now bringing neuroscience principles into their organisational development functions, you know, and workplace cultures providing more rewarding behaviours and environments. And I'm seeing now organisations really focusing on leaders that get the people equation, which I think is so vital today. Next, I'd like to explore a really interesting model that was created by an author called David Rock. Now, he is well known globally, and he's the CEO of the Neuroleadership Institute in the States. And you know, when we think about, you know, what I've just spoken about in terms of threat and reward and the social blame and neuroplasticity, he has, through his research, developed a model to explain those applications of neuroscience to talent management, which I use a lot in my work, and it's a fantastic model. And the model features 5 domains that, you know, underpin workplace behaviour, and that's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Now, status is our place in the social pecking order relative to others. Our brains constantly monitor our status and send signals of threat or reward based on our assessment of changes in our ranking. Now, much of this does happen subconsciously. So if our status is easily threatened any time, and this could be like when you feel belittled, or, you know, you can, you know, subordinate by words or actions of another, like, for instance, that situation I shared with you before. You're sitting at your desk and your manager comes up to you in front of everyone and says, I'm not happy with your work, I want to talk to you about it later. That can really threaten our status, and that's when the brain goes into, I call it, the limbic mode. So it's really important that we understand, you know, how this can affect workplace behaviour, and understanding the different threats and reward for that in terms of, you know, status rewards could be giving public recognition or being called upon for a subject matter expert. The next one is certainty. Now, the brain likes certainty. The brain likes to know what's going on. You know, certainty is our way of maintaining control over our lives and our environment. Now, every new source of information is immediately compared in the brain to all known stored data maps. So if you think about our brain, it's like a library, it's like a CD stacker. It's dealing with so much information every second that it's constantly attaching any new source of information to that library of information that we've stored over those many, many years of our lives. So we use those existing maps to actually evaluate and interpret new information, and the brain really likes familiarity. I mean, uncertainty actually invokes the limbic system. And that's probably why I find, you know, when I speak to leaders in organisations, that change initiatives fail because lack of communication, lack of, you know, certainty of vision, people don't know where they stand, you know, and certainty threats could be change in any form, you know, mixed messages, shifting goalposts. So that's why when we look at certainty in terms of workplace behaviour and in terms of being brain friendly, it's really important that we focus on things like reassurance and positive future expectations and open communication and balancing the unknown with familiarity. That is just vital. The next one I want to talk about is autonomy. You know, this is about choice. The brain likes choice. The brain likes to make its own choices. Now, funnily enough, the brain doesn't like being micromanaged. The brain likes control. It likes stability. It likes to be in the driver's seat. So reducing autonomy actually heightens stress. And this has been found in many experiments, which is really interesting. And it's interesting when I run workshops and I actually run this model with work in terms of leaders and workshops, and it's interesting seeing everyone in the room is very different in terms of where they see the threat and reward of what's important to them, whether it's status or autonomy or certainty. But I probably find that the ones that are the most popular are autonomy and certainty, in terms of leaders that feel that that is really important for their brains to work effectively and efficiently. So autonomy threats would be things like being told what to do and how to do it, being overruled on decisions. But rewards would be, you know, delegated decision making, you know, providing options and seeking and acting on feedback. Relatedness. Oh, the poor little chicken. The brain's a social organ. We all want to feel like, you know, we connect to each other. We've, you know, evolved as highly social animals, and our intuitive skills for actually assessing others is actually quite impressive. So we like to work and feel that we relate to other people, that we trust them, that we consider them to be a friend, you know, that we feel connected. You know, in terms of relatedness, you know, threats around that could be things like your values are at odds with the organisational culture. You know, it might be a highly political environment. You're working in a dysfunctional team, or you're finding yourself isolated from your team. Certainty rewards, though, it's important to create an environment that's positive and constructive. Practices that encourage interpersonal connections. You know, you've got team play and team building. You've got management understanding and fairness. And that leads me into the last one, fairness. Now, fairness, or the absence of it, triggers our brain's primary threat and reward mechanisms. With our strong fairness detection capabilities, the workplace provides ample opportunities to actually demonstrate or decimate fairness. So it's really important, like this is, and it's interesting, the research around this, around fairness threats being, you know, things like inconsistent behaviour, workplace bullying, unearned rewards or favouritism or bias, and how we can really tap into that as leaders is through transparency, involvement, living the values, equality. So I just want you to take a few minutes just to reflect. I've actually given you lot of information in the last few minutes. I just want you to take just, 30 seconds to reflect on that information and what that means for you, your role as a leader within your organisation or a human being, and what you think you might do differently from understanding some of these insights and research I'm sharing with you today, and write them down if you get a chance, because it's really important for the brain to reflect on the information in terms of, okay, how can I use this learning or insight, and how can I actually put this into action within my role, within my organisation, and make a difference. And next I want to just touch around in terms of coaching. One thing that I focus a lot on in my work is leadership coaching, and that's where I actually go into organisations. And even though I work with organisations from a strategic level and a team level, and also with groups of leaders, I also spend a lot of time one-on-one with leaders. And the one thing I do in terms of my coaching is use brain-friendly practices in terms of that neuroplasticity and tapping into the reward center of the brain. And I also coach my leaders how to be better coaches, because it's really important that we are growing future leaders, and the more we actually practice a lot of these areas and focus attention on these areas to make change, we can do it. The brain can change, but it just needs an environment that's positive and encouraging, and that's where as leaders it's just vital that we are coaching and growing future leaders, because they are our future. Ooh. Okay, so I have actually any resources that you're interested in, I can send you the SCARF model by David Rock, which is a great read, and also a really interesting white paper on the neuroscience of talent management. So if you are interested in getting a lot more, I've given you kind of a real high level lot of information in the last sort of while on neuroscience, and why, understanding the principles of neuroscience in terms of talent management and how we go about managing performance and recruitment and understanding learning and development and leadership. It's so many aspects of talent management that neuroscience plays a vital role in terms of us being more effective as leaders and talent managers. So if you are interested in any further resources, please reach out to me, because my purpose is about making a difference and helping leaders around the globe be the best they can be. So this is my email. That phone number is a 61 in front of it, because I'm actually in Australia. So if you want to ring me or have a chat or email me, please do, because I'm more than happy to share any more insights around this area or any other area of neuroscience. And that's the end. So thank you so much. I hope you got a lot of valuable and high impact information into why leading talent through neuroscience is really critical today. Thank you.
Very much, Sonia, for a very interesting presentation. Folks, we're open for the question and answers now. So you could either raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on your webinar console. So if you click on it, I'll give you an opportunity to speak to Sonia, or you could put your questions in the question box. I see there are a couple of questions already in the box, so let me go straight to the question box. Okay, the question. There's a question interesting, Sonia. Do you believe psychometric tools are really helpful in mapping individuals' personal profiles?
That's a great question. I actually use a couple of them, and I actually have a neuroscience one that I use that I find really powerful. Look, I think like any tools, they're a tool, and they can give you some really interesting insights into different preferences or thinking in terms of understanding yourself, but also understanding others and how you can all relate with each other. So I've seen the tools in terms of that I have used and I've been exposed to being incredibly powerful for change and they're effective, but the person that is actually going through the tool with you needs to be open to understanding, kind of, because a lot of these tools do put a mirror up in front of you. So if you're open to having that mirror put up in front of you and working with someone to really better understand who you are and your thinking preferences, then I can see that it can be really powerful. But I do see a lot of leaders that will go through any sort of assessment or psychometric tool. They will use the tool and go, yeah, okay, thanks, and do nothing with it. And therefore, it just becomes another tool. Does that answer the question? I hope so.
Oh, I hope so, and thank you very much. We have another one from Mark Stora from STC. The question is, how do you deal with the scenario when you go into limbic state, the confrontation by your boss?
That is a really great question, and I think this is where, through all my work in neuroscience, and I think when I said at the start that not only has neuroscience for me been such an amazing and powerful journey for the leaders and organisations I work with, but also I think probably mostly for myself in terms of understanding how my brain works and understanding my triggers. So it's really important in terms of understanding what your triggers are. And so say, for instance, okay, if a boss came in and said to me, Sonia, I'm not happy with your work, blah, blah, yeah, I would probably be pretty upset about that, but there's probably other triggers that I'd be probably a little bit, that would actually activate my limbic system a little bit more than that. And that's, for instance, I don't like to be micromanaged. It's one of my things that is a real trigger, someone constantly telling me what to do. So I'd find that my limbic brain would probably take over in that situation. So when that happens, I tell my brain, okay, Sonia, this is a trigger for you. I recognize the feeling. The brain actually, it calms the brain down by actually naming the emotion. So if you actually sit there and go, okay, I'm feeling hurt, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling upset, by actually naming the emotion and taking a deep breath, it actually calms the limbic system because you've recognized it. You're telling your brain, I've recognized it, it's all good, not the best scenario, let's take a deep breath. So other than going, oh God, I can't believe that happened, and why did you do that, blah, blah, by actually naming the emotion is really effective for the brain. The other thing that is really healthy for the brain to help with those sort of situations is constant, like breaks and things like that. I know we're constantly working and paddling all the time, and the more you're working and paddling and doing lots of different things and processing and thinking and writing emails and not actually take, I work with a lot of leaders that don't take breaks or don't take time out or rest their brain, then the brain starts to get tired. And the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain we really need to be pretty on the ball when it comes to decision making, when that gets tired, the limbic part of our brain takes over. And that can be a little bit detrimental, because when the limbic part of the brain takes over, that's when we start to become, we can become emotional. So even the slightest trigger when we're tired can actually make us go limbic. And that's why things like mindfulness and meditation, or even going for a walk for 5 minutes just to calm down, you know, just re-energize the prefrontal cortex, can make it more efficient. So when triggers or someone that, you know, or, because I mean, if you think about, you know, any sort of environment, we are constantly looking for threat, and it's important for us to manage that threat effectively, and the way to manage threat effectively is by having an effective prefrontal cortex, so we can think and process logically and not emotionally. Does that make sense?
Well, thank you. Mark, if you're satisfied or you have any supplement, please feel free to write again. But meanwhile, let me move to...
Yeah, please do.
another question. How can you tune your brain to build a habit or interest in learning things? Or otherwise, how could you stop your brain from getting bored in learning new things?
Wow, these are really cool questions. I suppose for me, and I'm just, and also the leaders that I work with that I spend a lot of time developing and coaching, and this is where like it's really important for our brains to constantly keep learning. There's so much research now around Alzheimer's that they're seeing now that people are actually fighting off Alzheimer's by learning, by actually reading and keeping the brain active. It's really important that we do take time out for ourselves to learn new things, and that could be like learning a language or learning how to dance, or going and doing a course or a program. And I suppose for me, I'm so passionate about learning. It's just pretty much formed a habit for me because I know the why of it. So I've tapped into the emotional part of my brain by understanding why I do what I do. So when the real, and this is kind of another webinar I think around, learning and change and tapping into the why. There's a great book called Start with the Why by Simon Sinek, and he actually talks a lot about change initiatives, and for people to grow and change, it is around tapping into the why system of the brain. So for me, I'm constantly wanting to learn and grow because I'm so in love with what I do and what my purpose is, because why I do what I do is because I love not only becoming the best person and human being I can be and the best leader I can be for not only myself and my community, but also for my leaders and organisations I work with. So it's really important for me to actually constantly learn, because I'm trying to create an environment where I'm growing and creating other leaders. So if you can tap into the why it's important to you, whatever sort of learning or change initiative you want to do, you'll do it because it's important to you and it serves purpose. I hope that makes sense. If you want more information on that, I can send you more information. It's a great, if you ever get a chance, look at if you have access to TED Talks or even on YouTube. His name's Simon Sinek. It's S-I-N-E-K. He talks about Start with the Why. It's a fantastic 20-minute video, and he talks about how to inspire not only yourself but inspire others.
Thank you very much, and
thanks for the question.
Well, we have another interesting one. What impact does language has over thinking patterns, considering we are living in multilingual societies and simultaneously communicating in different languages in an organization?
Can you repeat the start of that question?
So what impact does language has over thinking?
Language. Wow.
I mean, considering considering we are living in a multilingual societies and simultaneously communicating in different languages.
I mean, language is really. I used to live in China, and I tried so hard to learn Mandarin, which was incredibly difficult. But again, I was living there and I really wanted to learn the language. So I tried everything I could to really understand different phrases and words, and tried my best to have conversations with my colleagues in Mandarin. And yeah, I think they say this is why children find it much easier to learn languages, because my daughter at the time was 4, and she was interpreting. She was like my little interpreter in Shanghai, and it was amazing. But seeing her pick it up so quickly, and I found it so difficult to learn. And I suppose because different aspects of the brain have different functions, even though they all work pretty much. They're always constantly working together. And I think because I hadn't actually activated the language center of my brain, or the part of the brain that you use for languages, and if you want me to find out what it is, I can get back to you. But it was difficult for me to learn the language because I hadn't actually focused on that part of my brain for a while. And this is where, you know, even though I'm talking about neuroplasticity and we can actually learn and change our brains, because our brains have actually got so much information and data in our brains, and, you know, now as adults, it's filled with so much storage of memories and experiences and learnings, and a lot of this stuff we're not conscious of. Because it's jam-packed, filled with so much information, it does resist learning new things because it's like, come on, I've got so much in your brain, we've already formed your habits, let's just, you know, let's just go with the flow and not learn anything new. So you really have to be very focused and conscious if you want to learn something new. And it is about practicing. You just have to keep practicing and focusing attention on it. And I think it's just really important, you know, I think one of the things I do a lot of work on around this space, and there's actually a really interesting white paper around the neuroscience of cultural intelligence, is that, you know, Australia is a very multicultural country, is understanding different people's beliefs and languages and different ways of thinking, and I think that that is really vital today because we are such a global organisation that we're more open to understanding the diversity and diversity of thinking, you know, around the globe. So does that answer? I don't know really if that answered the question you're asking. I'm hoping it is in a long-winded way.
No, well, certainly. Thank you very much. And just one last question. What is the best timings for sleeping at night to give rest to the brain?
Wow, best timings to sleep at night. Again, this is another, I was at a Neuro Leadership Summit in Sydney last week, and there's a woman that's I think she works at Harvard, and she came and spoke, and she focuses on this. She focuses on neuroscience and sleeping, and I listened to her for an hour speak. She was really interesting, so she didn't send me off to sleep, but she was saying things like, you know, your brain, the best time to really understand around, because everyone is different. Like I'm a bit of I really like my sleep, so I like to go to bed at 9:30, so I'm actually staying up late tonight. This is way past my bedtime. So I have a particular time that my brain kind of shuts off. It kind of goes, yeah, 9:30, you're getting a bit tired, and then I like to wake up a bit earlier. Whereas I know a lot of my other colleagues, like, well, my brain tends to get tired around 11, 12 o'clock, and some only need 5 hours sleep, some need 7. So it's not really about how much sleep you need. It's about the quality of sleep. So some people can have like 5 hours really good quality of sleep and be really, really effective during the day. Some people need 7. They do say the average is about 7, but as long as it's quality. And, you know, she mentioned a couple of techniques, and she just said, look, everyone's very different in terms of their sleeping patterns, and your brain and your body kind of know what you need, and the best time to actually assess, you know, the best sleeping patterns for yourself is when you're on holidays. I mean, obviously give your times, like when you go on holidays, you know, a couple of days for yourself to wind down, but when you're relaxed on holidays, just kind of get a sense of what your body's telling you, and when you feel tired and then when you wake up is your body's natural way of telling you this is what you need in terms of your sleeping. I mean, sleeping now, you know, in terms of sleeping deprivation, they're actually saying now that sleeping deprivation in terms of the research they've done is actually a lot more detrimental to the workplace than if you're actually intoxicated. In terms, so that, you know, and you know how sometimes you go to work and you haven't slept all night and your brain can't function, and that can be actually detrimental to yourself. So that's why things like not looking at emails or anything electronic before you go to sleep. I know everyone says this, but we still have this tendency to be, you know, watching television or checking our emails just before we go to bed. Let your brain rest. And, you know, part of that might be just, you know, reading a book or having a bath or, you know, just laying there for half an hour and things like that. But just keep any sort of, anything that can really activate the brain, because the brain actually does need that quiet time before it goes to sleep as well. Does that kind of answer your question in terms of, again, if you want me to send you any information on that, she's doing some great work on this.
No, it's at least I found it very, very helpful. Thank you very much, Sonia. And folks, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. Sonia, any concluding remarks you have before we dismiss out?
No, thank you so much for spending the last 45 minutes with me, and it's been an absolute pleasure sharing my knowledge around this area, and please reach out if you need any further information. I'm more than happy to help you, and I really hope you use some of these learnings and insights to make a difference in terms of your leadership roles.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I would like to thank you especially on behalf of Mal for your time and for giving this valuable presentation. And folks, all of you who participated and asked the questions, thank you very much. We are recording this webinar. We will be uploading the recorded version on our Mile community, which is community.mile.org. In fact, Sonia has her own community of practice on Mile community, so please feel free to visit our community and join it for free and enjoy interaction with a number of subject experts, including Sonia. You can do that, and Sonia has her email address also publicized on the screen, so you can always contact her directly if you have any questions. With that note, I would like to end the webinar, so you all will be automatically dismissed out. Thank you very much. You all have a good day, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.